Hey, my friends, welcome back. Tonight, you find yourself waking under the blazing Nubian sun, the kind of heat that makes the sand shimmer like a mirage, and the air so dry it feels like you're breathing through a straw. Around you, skin tells stories, lines, dots, patterns carved into flesh, not just for beauty, but for something far more mysterious: healing. You probably won't survive this night without learning some eyebrow raising facts about tattoos, because these aren't just your average ink jobs. No, these tattoos are ancient medical magic, a kind of walking pharmacy etched onto human skin thousands of years before modern medicine even dreamed of aspirin. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. I love seeing where in the world you're joining me from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the dusty Nubian desert, heat pressing down like a wool blanket that's been left in a clothes dryer a little too long. The landscape is harsh, sandy plains stretching to hazy horizons, punctuated by jagged rocks and thorny shrubs. But life finds a way. You feel the sun beating on your skin, and just like the Nubians who walked here millennia ago, you notice something remarkable. Bodies here bear intricate tattoos, not haphazardly, but with deliberate designs, mostly on women's arms, legs, and sometimes faces. These are not mere decorations. No, these tattoos serve as maps, medical blueprints for healing and protection. One mainstream historical fact you'll want to tuck into your sleep sack is that ancient Nubians were among the earliest known tattooed peoples, with evidence dating back as far as 5,000 years ago. Archaeologists have uncovered tattooed mummies and figurines that showcase the extent of this practice. The tattoos often appear on women's bodies, suggesting a gendered dimension to their use. More than just adornment, they were tools for health and social identity. But here's a quirky tidbit: the pigments weren't always what you'd expect. Instead of fancy inks, Nubian tattooists sometimes used soot or mixtures from medicinal plants, which may have had antiseptic properties, combining art and medicine in one prick. Historians still argue whether these tattoos functioned primarily as a form of medical therapy, spiritual protection, or a combination of both. Some believe they were meant to stimulate healing at certain points on the body, akin to acupuncture, while others see them as symbolic shields against illness and evil spirits. Either way, you can't deny the power behind those ancient needle pricks. Imagine now the scene: a small village near the Nile, women gathered around a fire, while a healer's assistant carefully readies a tattooing tool, most likely a thorn or bone, sharpened to a fine point. The skin is cleaned, soot prepared, and then the needle taps begin, slow and rhythmic, mixing pain and promise. This isn't just a cosmetic ritual, it's a transformative ceremony where the body becomes both canvas and medicine chest. And you wonder, how did these women bear the pain? Well, the rituals were often accompanied by chants or prayers, framing the pain as necessary for rebirth or protection. The process was as much psychological as physical, intertwining the senses and the spirit. You, standing here in this ancient desert dawn, might find yourself squinting, questioning how such practices could emerge so early and be so effective. Yet here you are, feeling the weight of history on your skin, literally. As the sun climbs higher, The heat intensifies, and your skin prickles with sweat. But this is the birthplace of tattoo medicine, a living legacy inked in time. And tonight, you'll drift to sleep with these images etched in your mind, ready to unravel more of Nubia's secret healing arts. You keep moving, the dry wind tugging at your clothes as the Nubian landscape unfolds around you, more than just endless sand and sun. This place, cradled between the banks of the mighty Nile and the rugged deserts beyond, is a crossroads where cultures meet like rivers converging in a delta of ancient stories. Nubia isn't just a name on a map, it's a patchwork of kingdoms, tribes, and traditions that have thrived for thousands of years, long before the pyramids stole the spotlight next door in Egypt. You can almost taste the mixture of dust and river water in the air as you wander among the villages, each with its own rhythms and rituals. The Nile, wide and slow, is the lifeblood here, bringing irrigation, fish, and fertile soil, making possible the unique culture that developed in this sometimes harsh, sometimes generous environment. One solid historical fact: Nubia was a powerful trading hub connecting sub-Saharan Africa with Egypt and the Mediterranean. Its people exchanged gold, ivory, and exotic animals, but they also passed on ideas, religion, art, and yes, body decoration practices like tattooing. The Nubians were no mere imitators. They adapted and transformed these influences, creating their own distinct identity. Here's a quirky little nugget. Some Nubian tombs reveal that tattoo patterns were designed not just for aesthetics or healing, but also to identify tribal affiliation or social status. It's like a permanent Instagram bio, except you don't need Wi-Fi to prove who you are. These tattoos were living badges of honor, mystery, and sometimes medical wisdom. Now, historians still argue whether Nubian tattooing was more heavily influenced by their Egyptian neighbors, or whether it arose independently from indigenous African traditions. It's a hot debate because the designs share similarities, but the meanings and techniques differ in fascinating ways. This question ties into broader themes of cultural exchange, identity, and resistance. As you sit beside the Nile's muddy edge, you watch women prepare plants for dye and observe a tattooist carefully etching patterns on a young girl's shoulder. The process is slow and deliberate. You notice how the people speak softly about the needles, not with fear but with respect, a sign of transformation, a way to harness the body's own powers to heal. The geography itself shaped these practices. In this land where water is precious and the sun unrelenting, health was a fragile treasure. Tattoos served as reminders and reinforcements of well-being, spiritual protection, and fertility. You might not expect to find such rich medical knowledge etched in ink beneath the desert sun, but here it is, ancient and potent. You notice small children playing nearby, their skin still unmarked, but you sense the rite of passage awaiting them. Tattoos here are not just decoration, they are medicine, identity, and sometimes survival. And the best part? They're written right on your skin, literally carrying your story wherever you go. As the afternoon light slants low and golden, you let yourself sink into the landscape's slow pulse, the endless hum of the desert and river blending into a lullaby of ancient life. Nubia's history isn't flashy or loud, but it's steady and enduring, like the very tattoos you just learned about. The sun's heat begins to soften, casting long shadows as you settle in closer to watch the tattoo tools of Nubia's ancient artisans. Simple, rough, yet undeniably effective. You might expect something intricate, maybe gold plated needles or ancient tattoo machines humming quietly in the background. Nope. Instead, you find sharp bones, thorns, and rudimentary awls paired with soot, plant extracts, and sometimes even ash from burned medicinal herbs. One fascinating historical fact is that these tools, though primitive by today's standards, were carefully crafted to puncture the skin without causing fatal injury. The tattooist's skill lay in their steady hand and intimate knowledge of skin depth, a crucial factor for the ink to settle properly, and importantly, for the medicine to take effect. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some tattoo needles were fashioned from the spines of fish or small animal bones, sharpened to a fine point. Imagine the focus and patience needed to prepare these tools, especially given how important each tattoo was to the community's health. It's like a prehistoric version of sharpen your pencils, except much more personal. Historians still argue whether the Nubian tattoo ink itself had inherent healing properties, or if it mainly served symbolic and psychological purposes in the healing process. Some suggest the soot or ash mixed into the ink contained antimicrobial compounds, making the tattoo a literal medicine embedded into the skin. Others believe the power was more spiritual, a charm against disease and misfortune. Watching a Nubian tattooist prepare their toolkit is like stepping back into a quiet workshop of healing and artistry. The process begins with cleaning the skin, often with water from the Nile or an herbal wash, natural antiseptics that reduce infection risk. Then comes the preparation of the ink, usually a mixture of soot and plant extracts, giving the tattoo a dark blue or black hue. The tattooist dips their makeshift needle into the ink and begins the slow, rhythmic tapping motion. Each prick deposits pigment into the dermis, but it also stimulates the skin, encouraging blood flow and perhaps triggering natural healing responses. You might compare it to acupuncture or modern microneedling, though those terms wouldn't have meant anything to these ancient artists. There's a certain meditative quality to this ritual, both for the tattooist and the person receiving the tattoo. Pain is inevitable, but it's not meaningless. Instead, it's a transformative experience, marking a physical and spiritual passage. You can almost hear the quiet chants or prayers accompanying the needle's dance on skin. Interestingly, the tattoos often follow specific patterns related to the location of ailments or vulnerable body parts. It's a kind of ancient body map, guiding healing energy or magic where it's needed most. This precision hints at a deep empirical understanding, even if wrapped in the language of myth and ritual. As twilight approaches, you can imagine the hush of a Nubian village under starry skies, where these tattooed healers and their patients quietly carry the knowledge of their ancestors inked onto living flesh. The tools may seem simple, but the legacy they create is anything but. You wake to the faint crackle of a fire and the scent of burning herbs, maybe frankincense or myrrh, or something more pungent and local like desert lavender. The early morning air is cool and still, and nearby, a woman stretches her arms, revealing tattoos that run like ancient rivers across her skin. They're not random doodles or decorative flourishes. Each one marks a story, a pain, a healing, a rite. In ancient Nubia, women weren't just the recipients of tattoos, they were often the ones administering them. That's your solid historical fact for the night. Archaeological evidence shows tattooed female mummies, like the famous remains from the site of Gebel Ada, bearing ink patterns across their torsos and limbs. These weren't just body art, they were therapeutic, ritualistic, and profoundly personal. Here's your quirky detail. Some researchers believe these women may have been midwives or healers. Imagine showing up for your ancient medical appointment, and instead of a white lab coat, your physician has snake shaped tattoos curling up her arms. Kind of a power move, right? Especially when that tattoo might be part of your treatment plan. Historians still argue whether these tattoos were meant to treat physical ailments directly, think joint pain, reproductive issues, or inflammation, or if they served more as talismans, protecting against spiritual illnesses like possession, curses, or ill willed ancestors. One side says acupuncture with ink, the other says magic force field, and honestly, maybe it's both, or neither, or something more complicated we haven't thought of yet. You trail behind one of these healers as she moves from hut to hut. Her presence brings a quiet comfort. Mothers show her their swollen bellies. Old men extend their aching knees. She places her fingers on their skin like a reader scanning an ancient scroll, deciding what pattern goes where and why. Each design is carefully selected, not just for its beauty, but for its power. Some resemble stars, others are like zigzag rivers. Some form protective eyes, or spirals meant to trap evil. Placement matters too. You might have lines circling your wrists if your joints ache, or concentric dots around your belly if you're struggling with fertility. It's a kind of visual diagnosis, etched in real time. And unlike a temporary cream or pill, these treatments stay with you. They scar, darken, fade, but never quite disappear. It's medicine with memory, and in a culture where oral tradition ruled, your skin becomes your chart, your prescription, your testament. You notice how the healer sings softly while she works. The rhythm matches the tattoo's tap, tap, tap. It's not just ambiance, it's ceremony. And that's another thing. The tattoos are never just physical. The entire process is infused with sacred energy. Songs, incense, offerings to protective deities. It's all part of a larger choreography of care. By late morning, the healer is back in her own home, preparing more pigment and sharpening her tools with a stone. You wonder how she learned all this. Did her mother teach her? Her grandmother? There are no textbooks here, just memory, practice, and perhaps dreams. You sit quietly and feel the warmth of the sun rising over the sand. Somewhere a goat bleats, someone laughs, and the air smells faintly of rosemary and charcoal. You can't help but think that medicine, in this world, isn't separate from life. It's woven into it, tattooed, in fact, into every wrinkle and scar. You're walking now beneath a sky the color of burnt copper, the kind that makes you squint just to keep the horizon in view. Around you, the land stretches out flat and dry, punctuated by acacia trees that look like someone tried to draw an umbrella without lifting the pencil. As you move, you start to pick up on the deeper rhythm of Nubian spiritual life, one that hums underneath everything, like a bass line too subtle to catch at first, but impossible to unhear once noticed. Religion and medicine in ancient Nubia weren't neatly separated like departments in a hospital. Nope, they were deliciously tangled. Every illness had a spiritual layer. Every cure had a ritual. You didn't just treat the body, you treated the soul, the ancestors, the gods. And tattoos, they were a direct line to the divine. So here's your solid historical fact. Nubians worshipped a pantheon that blended indigenous deities with Egyptian imports. Gods like Amun and Isis shared the stage with local spirits tied to fertility, protection, and healing. Tattoos often mirrored this fusion, showing symbols that bridged both belief systems. A protective Wadjet eye here, a local snake goddess there, body art as interfaith diplomacy. Now, for a juicy little tidbit, some tattoo designs were placed specifically to communicate with the gods, not just for divine protection, but to keep certain deities away. Imagine getting a tattoo just to say, "Hey, creepy underworld demon, I see you. Kindly move along." It's like having an ancient do not disturb sign on your thigh. But historians still argue whether these tattoos were understood as prayers, offerings, or physical manifestations of the gods themselves. Was a tattoo of the lion headed goddess Sekhmet a tribute, a call for help, or a way of saying, "I am her, now leave me alone"? The lines blur quite literally. You find yourself at a small shrine, really just a circle of stones and offerings tucked near a spring. Women kneel around it, whispering and tying string around their wrists. You spot one with tiny tattoos dotting her forehead, barely visible unless she turns just right in the light. They shimmer like constellations. Her friend has larger marks, snakes, and zigzags climbing up her legs like inked ivy. She tells a story in hushed tones about a time she fell ill, when no herb helped, no spell worked, until the healer tattooed a sacred symbol over her ribs. "The fever broke that night," she says, not looking up. Of course, you don't get a receipt for something like that. No clinical trial, just belief, tradition, and memory. But belief, especially the kind shared by whole communities, can be a powerful thing. And in a place where medicine and magic dance so closely, tattoos become part of your dialogue with fate. You wonder, as you lean back and trace the shapes with your eyes, if maybe these marks helped the Nubians feel a bit more in control. When so much in life, weather, illness, childbirth, was unpredictable, being able to choose what you placed on your body might have felt like reclaiming some of that chaos. The scent of incense curls around you, and somewhere in the distance, drums begin their lazy rhythm. The night creeps in gently, stretching across the dunes like a slow exhale. Even now, long after the last tattoo needle has been set down, the gods are still listening. The afternoon is thick with heat, the kind that wraps around your shoulders like a damp wool blanket you didn't ask for. A donkey snorts in the distance, swishing its tail at flies, and you catch sight of a young girl sitting cross-legged in the shade of a mud brick wall. Her eyes are wide with nervous excitement, her wrist clutched in the firm but gentle grip of a local healer. Today's the day. Her first tattoo. You've seen this scene repeated across generations, and now you're close enough to notice the small rituals that precede the prick of the needle. A handful of herbs are burned, not just for the pleasant scent, but to purify the air. The healer murmurs what you assume are words of blessing, though it might just be the ancient equivalent of breathe in, breathe out. Honestly, no one warns you how ASMR the desert can get. Every soft sound carries. Here's your one solid historical fact to anchor this moment. Tattooing among ancient Nubians appears to have begun early in life for many individuals, particularly women, and the markings weren't always for decoration or adulthood. Some were drawn to shield the young from illness or misfortune. a kind of childhood vaccine that you wear, a quirky tidbit to slip in. There's some evidence suggesting that certain tattoos were believed to confuse or scare away malicious spirits, sort of like giving your body a spooky security system. Imagine wearing a scary mask forever, but only on your left shin. Practical? Debatable. Memorable? Definitely. Historians still argue whether the first tattoos were a preventive tool against illness or a reaction to it. Did healers mark children only after a sickness struck as part of treatment, or was it a proactive gesture, like slathering on SPF before you ever meet the sun god? Either way, it speaks to a belief system that didn't wait around for things to go wrong before taking action. As the healer dips her thorn needle into the inky mixture, you hear the faintest intake of breath from the girl. Her eyes don't water, though. Brave kid. The tapping begins, slow and steady, forming a crescent just below her collarbone. You're told this shape is associated with protection for the heart and lungs, a kind of armor against coughing spirits or cold winds, both of which are taken very seriously out here. It's not just a one and done situation, though. The girl will likely return over the years for more ink, more symbols, layered like stories across a lifetime. Each one a medical chart and a diary entry rolled into one. You can almost see the future designs forming in your mind's eye, interwoven spirals, geometric shields, maybe even tiny figures that hint at gods or ancestors. The healer finishes, wipes the ink with a cloth, and presses a cool poultice made of mashed herbs onto the fresh wound. It's a smart blend of antiseptic and anti-inflammatory plants, possibly something like acacia or myrtle. Who needs modern drugstores when your backyard is basically an apothecary? The girl smiles faintly. The pain wasn't nothing, but it wasn't unbearable either. And more importantly, it was meaningful. She doesn't look scared now. She looks grounded, like she belongs a little more than she did this morning. You linger for a moment longer, watching her dart off to show her friends, who shriek with admiration. There's pride in that tattoo. It says she's part of something, that someone cared enough to mark her for protection, that her body carries not just her, but the healing and strength of her entire community. As the sun dips lower, casting a rich gold across the sand and reed huts, you walk slowly, the rhythmic tapping still echoing in your ears like a heartbeat. It's strange. Out here in the middle of nowhere, with no tech, no paperwork, and no language you understand, you've never seen medicine practiced with more soul. The night air is cooler now, carrying the scent of damp earth and something smoky, probably from one of the many fire pits crackling with evening meals and quiet laughter. You drift past a group of elders sitting cross-legged on woven mats, their bodies inked with so many markings it's impossible to tell where one symbol ends and the next begins. They look like weathered maps, soft-spoken, wrinkled GPS systems humming with stories you can't fully read. You're told these elders are living archives. Their tattoos span generations, illnesses, recoveries, rituals, and yes, even fashion choices. One man taps his thigh and mutters something that translates loosely to, "My cousin dared me." So even 3,000 years ago, peer pressure was thriving. Here's a steady historical fact. Among ancient Nubians, particularly women but also some men, tattoos evolved across life stages. What you wore at age 10 wasn't what you needed at 50. Your body became a kind of timeline. Need to remember your child's difficult birth and survival? Ink it. Survived a plague year with only a mild fever? Definitely ink that. It's like scrapbooking, but with needles and pain. Now for the fringe flavored detail of the night. There's some speculation, yes, it's hotly debated, that some tattoos weren't just visual symbols, but also had a vibrational element, meaning they were placed on parts of the body believed to resonate, hum, or tune in to energies, especially during chants or drumming ceremonies. Imagine a tattoo that literally buzzes with magic when the right drum beat hits. Ancient subwoofer meets acupuncture. Historians still argue whether tattoos used in this way were common practice or just the elite's spiritual experiment, like the body mod version of a luxury car. But traces of resonance points pop up across burial sites, especially near major joints and pressure areas. There's a chance these tattoos were part spiritual Wi Fi, part health insurance. An elder woman reaches for your hand and presses it gently to her forearm. Her skin is dry and soft, like aged papyrus, and you feel the faint ridges of ink that form a braided pattern. She whispers a word, maybe a name, maybe a charm, and smiles. This one, she says, was her third tattoo, placed after she survived a snake bite. You're about to ask what kind of snake when she chuckles and says, "The kind that wants you dead." Fair. Her tattoo, positioned just above the elbow, is said to block venom, not necessarily scientifically, but symbolically. And symbol here carries serious weight. If your mind believes you've got magical armor, your body often follows. And yes, that's a real psychological effect. Placebo, baby. Or in this case, ink sabo. She points out other tattoos among her friends. A band of dots at the ankle for circulation. A set of lines across the lower back to ease childbirth. A swirled pattern on the temple to calm seizures or perhaps rage, though she admits that one didn't work on her late husband. You notice that none of the tattoos are random. Every shape, every placement is intentional, like a well-edited sentence in a language without paper. The body becomes the page, and pain becomes the pen. One man shows you a set of scars overlaid with ink. These are called talking scars, you're told. The skin was first cut, allowed to keloid slightly, and then tattooed to emphasize the shape. It's like relief sculpture, but on your forearm. There's speculation that the raised texture helped with ritual touch, like pressing it during a prayer for extra oomph. And this is where things start to blur between medicine, magic, and memory. Because to these elders, it's all the same thing. Getting well isn't just about fixing the body, it's about realigning your entire story. Did you anger a spirit, neglect a ritual, fail to listen to your dreams? Your tattoo doesn't just mark where you hurt, it tells you why. You lean back, feeling the sand cool beneath your palms. The stars above are sharp and bright, clustered like silver seeds scattered on black cloth. Somewhere out there is the same sky your ancestors stared at, asking questions, inventing answers, and quietly, steadily, tattooing their hopes into skin. There's a certain quiet joy in the idea that healing didn't always require pills or procedures. Sometimes it needed fire, ink, a little music, and someone who believed enough to press the needle with care. And as the elders begin to hum, a low, rhythmic sound that drapes the night like a soft blanket, you wonder briefly what your own body might say if it could carry such stories. What symbols would live behind your ear, under your ribs, between your fingers? And would they hum too when the time was right? You close your eyes and listen, not just to the voices around you, but to something deeper, older. A knowing that healing isn't always about science. Sometimes it's about story. By the time the sun returns, brushing the edge of the desert with gold, like it's testing out a highlighter, you're already awake, sitting under the wide leaves of an acacia tree. Across from you, a woman adjusts the scarf around her head and rolls up her sleeve, revealing a pattern that immediately draws your attention, a spiral surrounded by concentric dots just below her navel. It's not just body art, it's a fertility charm. In ancient Nubia, fertility wasn't a personal concern. It was a community issue, a spiritual puzzle, and a biological mystery all at once. When a woman bore children, she didn't just continue her family line, she ensured the survival of the entire village. And so, tattoos became part of the toolkit, or perhaps the prayer kit, worn right on the body. Here's your solid historical nugget. Several mummies found in Nubia, including one particularly well-preserved woman from the site of Gebelein, display tattoos clustered around the abdomen and hips, regions associated with childbirth and reproductive health. Archaeologists believe these weren't just decorative placements, but may have been thought to strengthen fertility, ease delivery, or even ward off miscarriage. Now here's the fringe fact. Some symbols were intentionally mirrored or asymmetrical, possibly meant to trick spirits that caused infertility. Kind of like a magical decoy. Imagine marking your body with a maze and hoping the evil spirit gets so confused trying to follow it, they forget what they were doing in the first place. It's like spiritual GPS jamming. Ancient edition. Historians still argue whether these tattoos were primarily protective, curative, or celebratory. Did they help with actual biological fertility? Or were they a way of saying, well, I am ready. I am sacred, so I am protected. The medical versus mystical debate is ongoing, and no one's willing to pick a clear side. And maybe that's the point. Why choose when you can have both? You find yourself sitting beside the woman as she prepares for a small fertility ritual. She's lighting a small bowl of burning herbs, the smoke curling upward like soft ribbons. A group of other women sit in a half circle, their skin marked with symbols similar in placement, but wildly different in style. Some are dark and bold, others faded like memories, but each one tells a piece of the same story. She dips her fingers into a paste made from crushed acacia seeds and river clay and begins tracing it over her tattoos, refreshing them, honoring them. One of the women hums a low tone, and the rest join in. It's a melody without words, a vibration that seems to settle in your ribs like the bass line of an ancient lullaby. You watch as a tattooist, an older woman with hands stained by years of ink, leans in to touch up a fading symbol just above a younger woman's hip. The design is simple, two interlocking triangles meant to represent balance and duality. Some say it's a reference to the womb, others say it reflects the joining of male and female energies. Either way, it's beautifully precise, and the process is carried out with the kind of care usually reserved for painting the ceiling of a temple. And while the actual mechanics of childbirth remained, let's say, consistently messy across millennia, these tattoos were meant to turn the tide in your favor. They served as a kind of spiritual insurance. When the pain came, and it always came, you at least had your ink, your rituals, and your village, which frankly sounds a lot more supportive than the average modern waiting room with bad lighting and outdated magazines. You think now about how many of these women were tattooed not just for themselves, but for the generations they hope to create. These weren't just adornments, they were offerings, inked petitions to gods and ancestors asking, "Let this life continue. Let this body carry another." And when children were born, healthy, squirming, covered in that vaguely gross but completely adorable new baby layer, some of the first rituals involved marking the child's path forward, maybe a tiny dot near the ankle or a line across the shoulder blade. Small, meaningful beginnings. The day stretches forward, soft and slow, and you walk beside the Nile again, passing a mother carrying her baby in a sling made from woven reeds. You recognize a symbol tattooed on her collarbone, the same spiral you saw earlier, a sign of continuity, a promise carried from one body to the next. You close your eyes for a moment and feel the sun settle on your face, warm but not harsh. Somewhere behind you, laughter floats up from the cluster of women. You get the feeling that in this world, birth is more than biology. It's a sacred collaboration between body, spirit, and community, marked permanently by ink that whispers stories, even when voices fall silent. You're resting in the shade of a wall that still holds warmth from the morning sun when a group of figures strides past, robes flowing, gold glinting at their wrists and throats. They move with a quiet confidence that tells you exactly who they are, royalty, and not the stuffy, don't make eye contact kind of royalty. These are kings and queens who still walk among their people, who carry their divinity not just in what they wear, but in what's inked into their skin. In Nubia, power wasn't just declared with crowns and scepters, it was etched line by line onto the bodies of rulers. And that brings us to your solid historical fact. Members of Nubia's royal families, especially women, were frequently tattooed, not just for beauty, but as part of their divine authority. Some queens bore sacred motifs tied to fertility goddesses or warrior deities, reinforcing their role as protectors, mothers, and spiritual leaders. And here's your quirky fringe detail. Some tattoos were thought to activate under sunlight. That's right, ancient SPF magic ink. The idea was that certain symbols, when warmed by the sun, could awaken the protection of the gods. Whether or not that worked, no one knows. But imagine walking into court knowing your shoulder glyph just clocked into divine service because of a tan. Historians still argue whether these royal tattoos were meant solely for the ruler's protection or if they symbolized a pact with a specific god. Was that falcon symbol just for divine favor, or was it proof of a sacred oath? Scholars can't agree, but the permanence of these marks suggests they meant something deeper than fashion. You trail after the royal entourage and slip into a shaded corridor carved from smooth stone. Inside, the temperature drops, the air scented faintly with sandalwood and metal. You see an older queen seated on a low stool, bare-armed, her tattoos clearly visible in the flickering lamplight. Her markings are complex, layer upon layer of overlapping symbols. Eyes, stars, serpents, and a repeating sigil that looks a little like a rising sun peeking over waves. A priestess kneels nearby, applying scented oil to the queen's skin. The tattoos shimmer slightly under the lamplight, like raised braille for the gods. You're told these symbols were placed after major life events, crowning ceremonies, successful treaties, even military victories. The body becomes a royal scroll, and every mark is a decree. You'll learn that these tattoos weren't always inked in one sitting. Some took years to complete, each symbol added after a ritual, a pilgrimage, or a moment of transformation. It wasn't about decoration, it was about documentation. The tattoos became a ruler's resume, their proof of divine alignment and worldly accomplishment. One of the younger royals, maybe a prince or a general, shows you his own marks. A jagged line wrapped around his bicep, said to represent a lightning strike. For courage, he mutters, and clarity in chaos. Whether he believes that or not, you're not sure, but it's there, permanent, waiting to remind him every time he lifts his arm. And then you notice something else. The tattoos aren't just external. Some priests bear markings on their tongues. Just let that sink in. A tattoo on the tongue. Historians think these may have been ritualistic, possibly a sign that their words were sacred, or a reminder that even speech was a divine tool. Makes your fear of the dentist seem a little quaint. Later, in the palace courtyard, a dancer performs for the court, her movements slow and hypnotic, her limbs inked with symbols that seem to flicker as she turns. You realize that in this world, tattoos move, they breathe, they change with light and angle, they're alive. As the queen rises and the crowd bows, you feel the presence of something ancient, an understanding that the human body is not just a vessel, but a message. And those in power knew how to write that message loud and clear, using only ink, faith, and skin. You return to the quiet of the outer hall, brushing your fingers along the smooth stone. There's no need for monuments when the body itself becomes the record. These tattoos didn't just adorn rulers, they defined them. And in doing so, they outlived crowns, dynasties, even memory. The desert wind stirs again, carrying the distant sound of drums. And you wonder, how many messages have been lost to time, hidden in the skin of kings, queens, and warriors, now buried under layers of sand. But some still remain, if you know where to look. The palace fades behind you as you wander down a winding path, eventually arriving at a more modest scene. A quiet courtyard cluttered with clay pots, drying herbs, and the low murmur of conversation. Here, tattoo medicine rubs elbows with its earthy cousin, plant-based healing. And while the ink might carry divine whispers, the leaves and roots underfoot have their own grounded magic. A woman hunched over a grinding stone is mixing something into a thick paste, probably acacia bark and resin, based on the smell that makes your nose twitch. Her hands are stained with the deep reds and browns of plants pulled from the Nile banks. This, you realize, is where tattoo medicine meets its green twin, Nubian herbalism. Your anchoring historical fact tonight is this. The Nubians were skilled in combining tattooing with other forms of medicine. Their knowledge of local flora, like myrrh for antiseptic, frankincense for inflammation, and acacia for everything from toothpaste to wound care, was as rich as any papyrus scroll. Tattoos weren't isolated treatments, they were part of a whole system. And the quirky twist? Some tattoo inks actually included powdered herbs and plant resins. So you weren't just symbolically invoking protection, you were literally injecting medicine into your skin. Think of it as the ancient, less surgical version of a medicated patch. Except this one came with a lifetime guarantee and no fine print. Historians still argue whether these combinations were scientifically effective or spiritually symbolic. Did the herbs actually make a difference, or was it all in the mind, the placebo effect amplified by ritual and belief? Some say the plants helped with healing and immune response. Others say the symbolism did the heavy lifting. The truth probably lives somewhere in the middle. You take a seat on a worn bench as a healer demonstrates how different ailments were matched to specific treatments. She holds up a bundle of dried mint and touches it to her neck. Cooling for fevers, she says. Then she points to a crescent tattoo just above her heart, for the ones who shake during dreams. You realize she's describing a treatment for night terrors, combining touch, scent, and ink. Nearby, a man lifts his tunic to reveal a tattoo over his ribs, simple dots arranged in the shape of a river current. He explains, with a grin and a sheepish shrug, that it was done after a very bad meal and some regrettable goat stew. Digestive troubles. The ink, supposedly, helped move things along. You nod solemnly. Ancient medicine, still relatable. It becomes clear that tattoos didn't operate in a vacuum. They were the start of treatment, sometimes a diagnosis, and often a commitment. But they were rarely the only thing used. You'd follow your tattoo with daily herbal teas, smoke cleansing, perhaps even massage or music therapy. It was holistic long before the word got trendy. You also learn that different classes had access to different levels of care. Nobles might receive elaborate tattoos, imported herbs, and multi-day ceremonies. Commoners worked with what they had, local plants, simple ink, and whispered prayers. But everyone, in one way or another, believed in the system. Healing wasn't a luxury, it was a right, even if unevenly practiced. A young boy with bandages on his arm sits near the healer now. She unwraps them, revealing a fresh tattoo, nothing large, just a line of dots along his wrist. He'd been feverish for days, and while he's better now, this tattoo is meant to keep the illness from returning. You watch as she rubs his arm with crushed mint and honey, murmuring a short prayer. Her tone is gentle, practiced, like someone who knows how to talk to both the child and the gods. Later, she offers you a small cup of tea brewed from leaves with a name you can't pronounce. It tastes like citrus and soil. She tells you it's good for calming the heart, steadying your spirit. Especially, she says with a wink, if you've been walking through too many stories. You smile and sip, and you realize how subtle and soft ancient medicine can be. It doesn't always roar with urgency. Sometimes it whispers, like the rustle of leaves or the rhythm of a thorn tapping against skin. As twilight begins to draw soft shadows across the courtyard, the healer carefully stows her tools. You notice her tattoos then, more subdued than the royal ones you saw earlier, but no less sacred. A thin vine winding around her ankle, a dot between her brows, a small cluster of stars near her elbow, quiet markers of a life spent helping others heal. You sit back, the tea warm in your chest, and think about how we still carry the same aches and fears, the same desire to feel safe and whole. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere deep in your bones, you already know what kind of ink you'd choose. The stars bloom overhead like glowing seeds scattered by a patient farmer, and you find yourself walking beside the slow pulse of the Nile. Somewhere upstream, frogs trill from the reeds, a kind of lullaby no one asked for, but everyone accepts. You pass a stretch of flat land where pottery shards peek from the dirt like shy fossils, and a few low, boxy structures remain, half buried, half forgotten. You're entering the realm of the past, where the dead speak through ink and bone. Tonight's grounding historical fact: archaeologists have uncovered several tattooed mummies in Nubia, actual human remains where the ink has clung to the skin for millennia. Most notable are the women buried at sites like Gabelain and Deir el Medina. Yes, technically in Egypt, but cultural overlap was real. These tattoos are more than just smudges. They're intentional, artistic, and remarkably still visible after all this time. Now, for your fringe detail. Some researchers believe tattoos found on these mummies correspond almost perfectly with known acupressure points, which means that long before needles were ever sterilized or acupuncture charts laminated, people might have been figuring out pressure therapy with soot and thorns. You can almost hear ancient medics muttering, "Hold still, this one's good for headaches." Historians still argue whether these discoveries are evidence of a medical tradition or just coincidental. After all, when you're only working with a few preserved bodies, conclusions come with a heavy dose of maybe. Some scholars insist the tattoos were symbolic protection. Others point to the placement, precision, and repetition across different individuals and say, nope, that's deliberate medical intent. The jury remains firmly out. You crouch near a partially uncovered mummy, carefully watched over by a pair of sleepy archaeologists who've built a windbreak of blankets and coffee cups. The body is curled slightly, as if still resting. The ink, faint and bluish black, forms a line of dots down the lower back. The lead archaeologist tells you this pattern may have helped with lower spine pain, or possibly during childbirth. Either way, the woman carried her medicine with her to the grave. You walk between excavation pits, now cooled by the night air, and overhear fragments of conversation. One team found tattoos shaped like lotus flowers near the abdomen. Another uncovered zigzag patterns behind the knees. All of them echo stories you've already seen walking the living villages. The body as archive, the skin as prescription pad. It's humbling, honestly. Thousands of years later, and these quiet inked bodies still whisper what ailed them, what healed them, what they believed. No paperwork, no charts, just pigment and flesh. And yet, it says so much. A scholar nearby explains that the presence of tattoos in burial sites also indicates that they weren't considered shameful or taboo. In fact, being buried with your tattoos exposed might have been a sign of pride or proof to the gods that you'd lived with strength and intention. No judgment, no regrets, just ink and eternity. You watch as a team gently uncovers a section of linen-wrapped limb, brushing away sand with slow reverence. There's a murmur of excitement. It's another tattoo, fresh as the day it was etched, preserved by the dry desert and a little cosmic luck. The pattern is unfamiliar, even to the experts. Could it be a symbol we've never seen before? A forgotten deity? A homemade charm? No one knows. But the thrill is real. Sometimes history gives you a clue with no answer, and that's the magic. You find a quiet spot to sit, back against a smooth stone, and look up at the stars again. It's strange to think that the people buried here looked up at the same sky, worried the same worries, hurt in the same places, and they marked their hope on their bodies. Not in case they forgot, but in case someone else needed to remember. Maybe that's why the tattoos lasted, not because of the ink, but because the stories were too human to fade. Morning seeps slowly over the horizon, a soft gold peeling back the chill of night. You're sitting by a small fire with a few village elders and one wiry traveler, someone who's clearly not from around here. His robes are Egyptian, his accent thick with river-smooth vowels, and his fingers nervously twist the edge of his scarf as he leans closer to inspect a tattoo on a local woman's shoulder. You're about to eavesdrop on a debate that's been simmering for centuries. Here's your firm historical footing. Nubia and Egypt shared a long, complicated relationship. Sometimes they traded peacefully, other times they clashed, yet their borders were more like riverbanks, always shifting, always touching. Ideas flowed back and forth. So did tattoos. That brings us to the central scholarly squabble. Historians still argue whether Nubian tattooing was an independent invention or if it was borrowed or even stolen from the Egyptians. Some point to similarities in motifs, scarabs, ankhs, lotus flowers. Others argue the techniques and meanings were distinct, adapted to each culture's needs and beliefs. And here's your quirky twist. There's evidence that Egyptian tattooing may have gone out of style for a while among elites, while Nubian traditions stayed strong. So it's possible that the Nubians were the ones preserving the art, while others let it fade, only for Egypt to later readopt it, like a fashion trend everyone suddenly remembered was cool. You sip something warm and slightly bitter, probably a root tea, as the Egyptian traveler begins sketching what he sees. He's fascinated by the placement of dots along the jawline of one elder woman, asking what ailments they represent. To keep the tongue from lying, she says with a mischievous wink. You're not sure if she's teasing or serious, probably both. He then produces a worn scroll from his satchel, carefully unrolling a faded diagram of Egyptian tattoo patterns, ones found on temple dancers and priestesses. You all lean in. The similarities are there, sure, but the meanings, that's where it gets slippery. The same spiral might invoke fertility in Nubia and represent cosmic balance in Egypt. Context is everything. The conversation turns to methods. The traveler mentions the use of metal needles in some Egyptian circles. The Nubians scoff. Too sharp, one mutters, leaves the skin angry. They prefer the gentle tap of bone or thorn. Slower, yes, but more respectful, more precise. You sense a quiet pride in that. Less glamour, more wisdom. One of the younger women rolls up her sleeve to reveal a vine-like tattoo curling up her arm. This, she says, my great-grandmother wore. Same marks, same meaning. We don't need books. We carry our stories. The Egyptian nods, clearly humbled, maybe even a little jealous. Later, as the fire dies down, you find yourself reflecting on the very human habit of borrowing. Cultures blend, mimic, steal, and remix constantly. It's messy, but it's also how traditions evolve, how knowledge spreads, how tattoos from one side of the Nile end up decorating a merchant's daughter on the other. You pass a group of children tracing patterns in the dirt. One draws a perfect lotus, another copies it, but flips it upside down and adds dots. Already, reinterpretation has begun. The symbols shift, meanings bend, but the art persists. And here's the quiet truth that hangs over the debate. Maybe it doesn't matter where the tattoo came from. Exactly. What matters is that someone needed it, that someone used it, that someone believed in it enough to let it hurt. You stand and stretch, the Nile glinting in the morning light. Across the water, temple ruins peek through the mist, Egyptian columns rising beside Nubian hills. Two worlds, touching at the edge of the ink, and as you walk away from the fire circle, the traveler still scribbling notes behind you, you wonder who borrowed what from whom, and whether it matters at all, as long as the story continues. The darkness thickens like velvet now, and your thoughts float toward the role of Nubian tattoos in rites of passage. These weren't just decorative or medicinal, they marked transitions, milestones, and transformations. In ancient Nubia, skin became the journal of your life, a rolling timeline of who you were becoming, and how the world should see you. One mainstream historical fact is that coming of age ceremonies often included tattooing, especially for girls. As adolescence crept in, a young girl would find herself standing at the threshold of a new life stage, and with that shift came ink. These were no impulsive decisions. There were no just turned 13, so I got a butterfly tattoo moments. No, these markings were ceremonial, often involving days of preparation and ritual, with family and community watching closely. You picture a young girl, maybe 14, maybe younger, wrapped in soft linen, sitting cross legged in the warm amber glow of an oil lamp. Her mother and grandmother flank her, each holding a small bundle of herbs, their fingers twitching nervously in prayer or excitement. She's nervous too. After all, this is not just a cosmetic appointment, it's a metaphysical upgrade. The tattooist arrives, a respected elder with calm hands and a collection of bone or metal needles. There are no numbing creams here, just warm oils and whispered encouragement. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some tattoo placements were intentionally hard to spot, hidden in creases, behind ears, or beneath hairlines. These secret tattoos may have represented personal ambitions, unspoken prayers, or even romantic desires, sort of like the ancient version of hiding your crush's name in a diary, except on your body, forever. Imagine ancient teens whispering, "Don't tell anyone, but I got mine behind my elbow." There's something charming about that kind of private rebellion wrapped in sacred tradition. For many girls, these markings symbolized fertility, protection, or readiness for marriage. In some regions, a girl wasn't considered fully marriageable until her tattoos were complete, which could take years. Some tattoos might be updated or added to after childbirth or significant events, evolving like a living record. Historians still argue whether these tattoos were universally applied or more common among certain social classes. Was this a right available to every young Nubian girl, or a privilege of the priestly elite and wealthy families? Some burial remains show extensive tattooing, while others are completely unmarked, hinting at either differing customs or unequal access to ritual healers. Boys weren't left out of this dermal storytelling. Their rites of passage often involved physical trials. Think mock hunts, endurance tests, or even nighttime vigils. And afterward, ink. The tattoos might signify strength, maturity, or a particular skill, like being an expert tracker or hunter. Unlike the soft curves and fertility themes often found in female tattoos, boys' ink leaned more angular, fierce, lightning-like zigzags, spear shapes, sunbursts radiating power. It's the ancient version of, yeah, I've seen some stuff. You imagine a young boy limping slightly as he returns from a desert test of survival, his skin sunburned and scratched. He passes the elder's judgment, and as a reward, he receives his first tattoo, maybe on his chest, maybe on his forearm. Wherever it lands, it is a permanent badge of having faced the world and made it back. No certificate, no Instagram post, just skin and ink. Sometimes a child might be marked long before adolescence, perhaps after a serious illness or divine encounter. These early tattoos often signified survival, spiritual favor, or the intervention of a deity. In a way, they said, this one's been touched by something bigger. These early rites laid the foundation for adulthood, shaping how others viewed you and how you viewed yourself. A person's tattoo history might even be recited in ceremonies, like a resume read aloud. Daughter of Tati, marked at 13 under the waxing moon, bearer of the river lines, survivor of the fever, and everyone would nod because the story was written right there, in her skin. These tattoos weren't just for show, they functioned as living identity cards, social passports, and spiritual armor. Forget business cards or social media bios. In Nubia, your body was the message board, and every mark mattered. One theory among scholars is that the pain of tattooing was itself a vital component of the ritual. The sting of the needle, the tenderness afterward, the responsibility of caring for the wound, all of it mirrored the challenges of growing up. You endured pain, and in doing so, proved you were ready for more. Sort of like emotional growth, but bloodier. The ritual might end with a celebration, food, music, dancing. The newly tattooed adolescent, still sore, maybe limping a little, would be presented with gifts. Bracelets, headscarves, psalm. You're still drifting, heavy-limbed and calm, when the story carries you deeper into the world of ancient Nubian tattooing, this time into the realm of healers. Because yes, while tattoos marked rites of passage and social identity, they were also powerful tools in the healer's toolkit. Imagine walking into a place that smells of frankincense and crushed myrrh, and instead of prescribing bitter herbs or muttering incantations over clay amulets, the healer rolls up your sleeve and starts mixing ink. One mainstream historical fact: certain tattoos in ancient Nubia were believed to have healing properties. Some were placed strategically over aching joints or sore muscles, like early acupuncture with a needle that just stayed forever. It wasn't random either. Specific designs were chosen to summon protection, ward off spirits, or draw energy toward the body's weak points. Think of them as magical band-aids that looked way cooler than anything in your medicine cabinet. You might sit with a wise woman, maybe one with half her face covered in spiraling marks, eyes sharp as flint, who listens to your complaint, a stiff knee, a weary back, a belly that won't settle. She nods, then begins preparing her ink, charcoal and soot, perhaps mixed with resin or ash from sacred wood. The tattooing itself could take hours, even days, and afterward, you wouldn't just heal, you'd carry that protection forward, stitched into your flesh. Here's a quirky detail that scholars still debate. Some evidence suggests Nubian tattoo ink might have included crushed beetle shells or powdered malachite, not for color, mind you, but for their energetic properties. Imagine your skin shimmering faintly with greenish minerals, like a healing spell written in glitter. Or at least, that's what you'd tell your friends as you flex dramatically after healing a twisted ankle. Historians still argue whether this medicinal tattooing was based purely on belief, or whether certain placements had genuinely therapeutic effects, possibly stimulating nerves or reducing inflammation. Some even suggest it operated like proto-acupuncture, aligning pressure points and energy lines. Was it science, magic, or a little of both? The answer, of course, is tattooed in mystery. You picture a woman arriving at the healer's hut, clutching her abdomen. Maybe it's chronic pain, maybe menstrual cramps, something persistent, something unspoken. The healer hums softly as she presses fingers to the skin that nods toward a mat. A spiral is inked just below the navel, maybe flanked by three dots, symbols long forgotten by modern medicine, but whispered among ancient grandmothers as the cure for what ails the womb. Over time, perhaps the pain eases, or maybe it doesn't, but the mark tells her she's seen, supported, sacred. These tattoos might also serve as preventatives. Expectant mothers were sometimes marked to protect the unborn child, especially if past pregnancies had ended in sorrow. A crescent moon, a line of stars, even a simple row of dots. Each mark was like a prayer cast forward into the unknown. Men, too, bore these healing marks. A warrior returned from battle might receive a design down the spine or across the shoulders to ease pain and ward off infection. Or maybe a laborer, someone who hauled bricks or harvested papyrus in the sun, would ask for something to strengthen the back, give stamina. They didn't have coffee, they had ink. But these weren't just prescriptions, they were part of a bigger ritual system. The tattooing process was sacred, often combined with chants, offerings, even a day of fasting. Pain was considered essential to the magic, not suffering for suffering's sake, but because transformation required effort. And because, let's be honest, you were less likely to take healing for granted when you had to sit through several hours of bone needle tapping. In one remote Nubian grave, archaeologists found a woman with dozens of dots and lines around her hips and thighs. Some scholars believe she was a midwife, her tattoos a kind of spiritual armor against maternal death. Maybe they helped her channel calm in the chaos of labor, or maybe they told every patient who saw her, "You're safe with me." Either way, her body spoke volumes, even in death. And here's something that feels strangely modern. These tattoos may have offered psychological comfort too. The belief that you were protected, that your suffering had been addressed, that someone had listened, that alone could bring relief. It's ancient placebo wrapped in ritual and soot. You imagine yourself lying on a woven mat in the shade of a tamarisk tree, the warm hum of insects in the air, while a healer whispers to the sky. Your back stings where fresh ink glistens, but you feel lighter somehow, as if you've let go of something, maybe pain, maybe fear, or maybe the belief that you had to carry it alone. One design found repeatedly in Nubian burial sites is a row of vertical dashes, almost like thallium. You drift now through the final stretch of this quiet journey, gliding like soft wind along the Nile, where stories and skin, rituals and rhythms fade into one another. The river narrows. The noise of bustling markets, goat bleats, and chanting priests dissolve into the hush of sand and starlight. All that's left is the body, inked, aching, alive, and the slow stories it remembers. Back in ancient Nubia, you find yourself entering one of the last chambers of mystery, the sacred tombs. Deep beneath layers of earth, beneath temples and hieroglyphs, you stumble upon the still forms of tattooed women and men curled in dry silence. Their bodies, still marked, speak from beyond death. Tattoos preserved like whispers. You're standing among mummies who never imagined their ink would outlive empires. Here's your final mainstream historical fact. In 2018, researchers who used infrared photography to detect tattoos on Nubian mummies dating back over 3,000 years, images no longer visible to the naked eye. One figure had a cross-shaped symbol on the upper arm. Another bore what looked like a pair of smudged S's, likely religious in meaning. These weren't decorative whims. They were chosen, inked and buried with care. And yet, historians still argue whether these tattoos were worn with pride or in secret. Some believe the tattoos identified religious figures, perhaps priestesses devoted to fertility goddesses, like Hathor or Bes. Others think they were meant to hide pain, to strengthen the soul before the journey to the afterlife. Maybe they were both. Maybe they were neither. Maybe we'll never know. And that's okay too. One of the more fringy tidbits? There's a theory, whispered among those who dig in ancient graves and sometimes forget to blink, that tattoos were also used to bind spirits. Not protect the wearer from demons, but house them. The skin becomes a cage, a charm, a lock. You wouldn't want to scratch that itch too hard. There's a haunting beauty in it. A person walks through life, marked by love, by pain, by belief. They pass into death, and centuries later, some curious archaeologist pulls them gently from the sands, holds up an arm, and says, "Look, ink a story, still alive, a sentence halfway through, a name you'll never pronounce, but you can trace with your fingers." Some of the tattoos on these mummified bodies are in places that would rarely be seen in life, along the ribs, behind the knees, the arch of the foot, intimate spaces meant for no audience, as if to say, even when the world cannot see me, I remain sacred. The ink was for the gods, not for the marketplace, so you wonder now if any of that ancient reverence carries forward, if your own scars, your own marks, visible or not, could whisper healing in the same way. You breathe in, feel the weight of stories carried in the body, like permanent verses in a fading song. Modern tattoos might celebrate birthdays, quote philosophers, or sketch cartoon frogs. But the impulse, that's still there. The urge to mark what matters, to make pain visible, or to make joy impossible to forget, to etch protection where it's needed most, maybe on the wrist, maybe over the heart, maybe along the curve of a rib you didn't know could hold memories. And here's the strange truth. It's not the designs themselves that carry power. It's the intent. Ancient Nubians didn't mark themselves because they thought it looked cool. Okay, maybe a little cool. They did it because they believed in what the ink could do. Heal, protect, communicate with gods, warn away bad luck, remind themselves that they were more than just flesh. You picture the very last tattooist, maybe 2,000 years ago, sitting in the shadow of a crumbling temple, sharpening a thorn. On one final client, one final prayer, the sun dips low, the needle moves, and then silence. The art disappears with time, but not entirely, because here you are, breathing gently in the dark, thinking of a woman who once bore 3 dots over her spine to ease her childbirth, thinking of a man who wore a falcon on his chest because he believed it made him run faster, thinking of a girl who, scared and lonely, asked for a moon by her ankle to keep her company. Ink fades, but meaning lingers. So this is the moment, friend, where the journey begins to melt into stillness. You've walked alongside ancient Nubians through their rituals, their pain, their healing, and their quiet conversations with the divine. You've stepped through incense smoke and buried chambers. You've felt the tap of bone needles, the sting and the stillness that follows. And now you carry their memory, not inked on your skin, but resting softly behind your eyes, like a dream that hums long after you've woken. Your breath slows, the sand settles, the wind barely stirs, and the tattoos, they fade quietly into the dark. Everything softens now. The rhythm of the river slows, stretching wide and warm beneath a silver sky. You lie back, weightless, letting the echoes of Nubian stories rise like mist and float away. The voices quiet. The ancient ink cools. The dreams dissolve into velvet dark. Your breath deepens. No more movement is needed. No more thoughts. Just the comfort of knowing that across thousands of years, someone marked their pain, their hope, their prayers, just like you sometimes do in your own way. Let the soft silence carry you. Let the dust settle. Let your bones rest easy, knowing you are part of something older than cities, older than memory, older than even the first firelight stories whispered into the dark. You're safe now. You're whole. You're already home.